balance, something that Captain Aimé spends most of his time searching for. It's worth mentioning that he captains a rather unusual boat. Scores of passengers put their lives in his hands, having no other choice than to risk a journey in this boat. Indeed, at 90 meters long and 40 meters wide, the wooden monster that he captains is practically uncontrollable. But given the appalling state of the roads in the Congo, the river is still the simplest way to transport tree trunks. Such a heavy load means each maneuver must be thought about well in advance. The journey to the capital promises a few tense moments for Vandu, the helmsman.
On part vers Kinshasa, ça déjà, c'est pas facile avec des radeaux, avec beaucoup de la caprice de la nature, les tempêtes, il y a aussi les sables, il faut que vraiment on soit concerté avec cette étape.
And make it they must. The 228 tree trunks that make up the raft are worth more than 350,000 euros. Losing even one of them is not an option, so the sailors constantly check the hundreds of meters of steel cables that hold their raft together. And even more importantly, if there is too much space between the trunks, passengers risk falling into a hole and ending up crushed by a log. There are around 50 passengers. Most of them are merchants or traders, all hoping to make a better living at the markets in the capital, especially by selling bugs that have become impossible to find in town. But there'll be a lot of ups and downs before they get to the capital. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is the second biggest country in Africa, so getting from one town to another is an ordeal. To go and see their family or do business, thousands of people must squeeze onto inconceivable boats. Every year, there are hundreds of fatalities. On the road, which are smashed up by the rain, all trucks fight hard to arrive at their destination. And there's no place for tiredness among the crew. For the passengers, the bumpy ride is nothing compared to having to walk when there are too many bumps. Whether on land or on water. The Congolese people have developed a constant survival instinct. Even when they're swept away by the waves, the bravery of these people will always overcome God's wrath. The huge 100-meter-long raft looks small in the middle of the Congo River. The descent towards Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, isn't going too badly. In 10 days, they've traveled more than 700 kilometers to reach Mbandaka without any problems. The last 700 kilometers won't be so easy, but for now, the sailors can take it easy.
Au lieu d'aller se traîner dans les douches, j'ai une douche et une piscine moderne. Je me lave comme habitude.
Bathing in the water from the River Congo isn't a very good idea, as it's extremely polluted by toxic waste from products used in the mines. And the swirls in this swimming pool are not at all like those you get in a jacuzzi. This young, reckless sailor is quickly called to order.
Dans 7 km, nani Elisa zobenda mai na 7 km, wa benda kuna. Dans 7 km, déjà ya benda marche avant. Ako benda eti kuna na salle. Akati. Sardine c'est bien.
Accidents are frequent on board the raft, and feet are usually the first to suffer from the many bits of metal sticking out of the raft.
Ebele bazoka ka mingi bazosoka parti ba bigui ba fidere kui câble bon il faut qu'on éviter tétanos, c'est très dangereux. Ouais c'est kaka bando wana okati ndambo okanyina sizo oswanye kana kisoba alcool ezate.
Even when you have very little, you can make do and find a solution in any emergency.
Ça, c'est les boissons de maïs.
The alcohol level is over 50%. It's perfect, except... The sailor will get an anti-tetanus jab when he arrives in Kinshasa. Until then, he goes back to his post. To travel on the river, the Congolese people don't have many options to choose from. There are whalers, which are sort of floating coffins that take on water everywhere, but are perhaps the most comfortable of boats available, especially when you compare them to these ones. They look like floating shanty towns, the biggest of which can pack up to 2,000 people onto them, without any water or toilets. According to Vandu, the state is not entirely responsible for this lack of infrastructure. The state has to cope with widespread corruption amongst its civil servants, and it has also struggled to pick itself back up from the damage done by 2 armed conflicts, as well as having to combat the guerrilla groups hindering the economy in certain regions.
Ça montre la difficulté du transport. Les gens sont nombreux, les gens souffrent, il n'y a pas de boulot, tout le monde sont lancés dans le commerce fluvial, chercher quelque chose à manger pour sa famille.
In the Congo, unemployment affects 40% of the population, with many people surviving rather than living. So everyone tries to sell what they can, like Gloria. This grandmother is traveling alone with her 2-year-old granddaughter.
Eza danger, makamba pasi kaka. Naza na ndako mutakutikela mwana zade. Na ndako nazofutela ndako abatu nakomi na nyonga 3 mois.
Life isn't easy for her. The parents of the little girl left without leaving an address or any money. To pay off her debts, Gloria has started to sell cassava flour, or, as it's familiarly referred to, fufu.
nasombi kana mwa tombola mukene kende na mwana nasombi pe na mbanda nasomba e 40 bongo nde tozokanga ba 5 sa nasombi na mbanda ka ya mwana pe moni nazozo nasengi kuti basuwe pa komanda wana na pese 5000 kaka.
A good discount for the grandmother, as the other passengers have paid around €8 each. To avoid passengers having to travel with their backsides in the water, the captain of the raft has made some planks available. But there aren't enough for everyone. So when new traders like Jean-Paul come aboard with several bags of goods, people are bound to grumble.
Ça sont de bons poissons, les grosses pièces. C'est pour aller à vendre à Kinshasa. Les poissons salés. C'est bio, c'est différent.
Jean-Paul makes a bit of space to store his fish in a dry patch, but the other traders don't appreciate it.
Papa,
ici au Congo, nous n'avons pas de transport. Voyez comment nous sommes en train de voyager dans des conditions tellement difficiles, on se dispute de place.
But quickly, the lack of space is going to become the least of their worries. Though the evening might have seemed calm and beautiful, Vandu and the captain have noticed the weather starting to change. They have just enough time to pull up on the bank.
Comme moko bokoti yango na makasi bobeta yango même marteau ekota mwa muke. Si là le menace du vent, c'est très dangereux parce que ça bouscule, suivant ça nous bouscule les radeaux, les troncs d'arbres, ça se bouscule, les vents là, les tempêtes là, ce n'est pas bon pour nous.
But simply the strength of the wind combined with the waves could cause the raft to completely come apart. Gloria, the grandmother, who is traveling with her granddaughter, is worried.
Est-ce que vous avez un peu de misipa?
Jean-Paul, the merchant, isn't much better equipped.
Vous voyez, ma tente est déjà vraiment archaïque. Il y a des trous par-ci, par-là, ça fait entrer de l'eau. Mais ça, c'est vraiment, ça nous protège seulement contre le froid. Si, pas contre le vent, ça va, le vent va emporter.
c'est la panique, mais on va gérer ça, ça va passer, ça va passer.
On fait un manque très grave, très grave.
The sailors tighten all the cables as much as they can, but the raft starts to come apart. Some logs become detached.
Voilà les gens qui nous effrayent. Ça, vraiment, ça peut causer même la mort. Ça peut faire noyer nos marchandises, voire la perte de vies humaines. On a peur.
Seigneur,
na pasi boye position mabe lobiko mabe papa so naza na moyen na kotambolaka boye te navandi na ngai nazoteka esika baninga bazoteka nakoki nde eza te souffrance eleki kaka namona moke boye esika mona lala eza te ta ndenge navandi na moi na mbula nyonso na nzoto.
But the problems keep coming. Water flows into the boat's hold through this air vent.
Quelque chose ici, c'est parce que la vague entre sur le bateau, ça va surcharger la salle de machine, ça peut noyer le bateau. Oui, on va mettre les bâches ici, je ouvre sur la salle de machine, après, on va essayer de les protéger. C'est parce que c'est dangereux. On ne sait pas comment ça va se finir.
Ça peut être aussi que ton scientifique que ta volonté s'infecte la tête comme au ciel. Donc aujourd'hui, notre peuple se joue, pardonne nos offenses, qu'on nous pardonne à ceux qui sont au poil sec, mais ne laisse pas tomber à la tentation, même des livres, nous tu m'as.
2 hours later, as if by a miracle, the wind calms down.
C'est déjà détruit.
The captain is disheartened. His raft isn't really supposed to transport passengers.
Toujours me m'appelle bateau pour un moyen de transport na Congo l'État a transport frivialité. Ce qui l'État a qui moyen de transport il y a l'État mais mutu akoyi kolinga amata na radote pour na a risquer. Ce qui bazondi ma ba risque yo pour na transport ezati.
Waking up the next morning is likely to be hard for the passengers, and the following day could be even worse. The Congolese people are like hostages. Their modes of transport are constant suffering, and their days are often very difficult. For the most part, the community fights each day for something to eat. In town, modest jobs are more easily found. But in the countryside, sometimes you have to risk your life for a full plate of food. At its mouth, the Congo River merges with the Atlantic Ocean. This mixture of the two waters has created a little paradise, the mangrove. This labyrinth of islands and canals is home to all sorts of fish, crustaceans, shellfish, and some very brave women. A 25-year-old Jeanne has been clam fishing for 7 years. It's the only job she's found that can feed her 4 children.
La première fois, il faut obéir sur la maboko. Au coin na mabele, uzubi boîte, pousser sur le col, au bando mat, au yeko boak, au pemi. Après moi, 30 minutes au kessus.
Around 100 of these women scour the depth without any equipment, just their courage and legendary lung capacity. And rising water levels, caused by climate change, have made their task a lot more difficult. But diving 4 meters deep 6 hours a day, all week, has its consequences. According to the villagers, the locals here have been fishing for clams for more than 100 years, which explains the thousands or even millions of shells that cover the riverbanks now. Their houses look like they're built on top of clam shells. This is because the divers don't sell them at the markets alive, but rather cook them here to preserve them better.
Net para to chena tono to cheba bambu e toki pasoki yango moko to longoli boy to kola ngo be to chena njungu to cheba episi ba tomati tutu ebeni.
These ones just came off the stove.
Coco donc ba jure belé banda ba coco na bisa. Donc to boa kaka donc to ebite.
The excessive farming of clams is very likely to cause them to disappear. To avoid this catastrophe, the villagers must alternate with another catch. But how else can they do it when no one has the means to buy nets? The country's economy is fragile and largely depends on the mining sector and, by extension, fluctuations in global exchange rates. But even when rates are at their highest, this silver mine very rarely benefits the local community, of which 3/4 live in extreme poverty. The truck plows on, despite the damaged road. The driver and his passengers cannot miss the last appointment of the day, so they keep going as fast as they can. That is to say, as fast as a man can run. It's a race against the clock to try and catch the last ferry of the day. And to be clear, if they miss it, they'll be sleeping on the riverbank. Bajo, the driver, maneuvers round the holes as best as he can, but he can't fight against his own truck's dilapidation. It seems unlikely that they'll make the last ferry, but miraculously, once they get past this last hole, the road is smoother. It was a close call, but luckily for them, the ferry rarely runs on time. For the past 30 years, this has been the only link between the two banks of the Congo Central Province. It takes 25 minutes for the old boat to reach the opposite riverbank. Before continuing their journey, the men check that their cargo is safely stowed, as the journey is going to shake it around a lot.
Ça peut prendre 10 heures ou 9 heures de temps pour arriver aux destinations.
Parce que c'est très dégradé?
C'est parce que la route n'est pas bonne, c'est très mauvais, c'est très mauvaise.
A 10-hour journey. Bajo is very, very optimistic. But he has a good reason to be. He has invested in something that he hopes will let him drive in a more relaxed way to Kimpese.
lunettes parce qu'à cause des insectes, je vais faire un accident. C'est pour ça que je porte des lunettes pour pouvoir conduire. Éviter les dangers parce qu'il n'y a pas de pare-brise.
C'est passé quoi?
Parce que les routes n'est pas bonne. J'avais fait un accident dans l'année de 2020.
The smallest accident can quickly become a tragedy as roughly 20 passengers are crammed onto the wagon. Comfort is limited, but it's still cheaper than traveling by minibus. According to Baggio, the state of the roads is linked to an evil that is eating away at the country.
Il y a la corruption.
Balancement chez tout. On est trop chargé. Des fois, vous tombez. Si vous ne tenez pas bien, vous tombez.
And each time they reach an obstacle that's too dangerous, the passengers are the ones who suffer.
C'est difficile, je vais faire descendre les gens. Bakita. Rapide. Oh, wana la bana otika bina kwa kisa bozo camion na bino. Oh. Ngamo na zomo na passe bino bofana bino. Eza pena ndengo na soki ngai na tamboli malamu te batu bakufi na kokangama na zana mbongo na kobimela na boloko te na kashote. Donc insécurité ezali na komi na libulu ya très grave na kitisi bango na leki. Esili.
Without his crew, Baggio wouldn't be able to go on. The journey has only just begun, but it's already become a marathon for the passengers.
Quand il fait très chaud, il faut toujours courir parce que le véhicule est devant. Donc il faut hâter pour atteindre le véhicule.
Sinon le camion il repart sans toi?
Ouais. C'est trop dur vraiment, village que j'ai 70 ans.
And yet, seeing him running, Jean is clearly a force of nature. Some of the younger passengers are already on the brink of exhaustion. At this rate, their average speed won't go above 10 kilometers an hour, especially since Baggio is trying to spare his very old tires.
Libanga wana eza bien te. Wana ko? Libanga na pona pine paf. Faut pas. Nakende.
The assistant gives the thumbs up a bit too quickly.
Laris, mama yezako sokola bagujo.
Luckily, the tire was repairable. And even more luckily, they had an air pump. But this good fortune won't be enough to get them to Kimpese this evening. They've only traveled 20 kilometers out of 100. Baggio is going to drive for part of the night to make up for lost time. But nobody truly believes that. Jean, the oldest person on the truck, has come to terms with it.
On risquerait même de dormir en cours de route, hein. On ne peut pas arriver aujourd'hui. Il y a des moustiquaires qu'il faut bouffer, il y a beaucoup de malaria. Il n'y a pas de moustiquaires, vous dormez à terre, sans linge. C'est pas normal. Hein?
And their hardship is just beginning. On the River Congo, the raft passengers are still in shock from the storm, and with good reason. The raft has taken a hit, and some trunks now float beneath the surface of the water. The sailors are trying to bring the wood back to the surface. Everyone's feet are in the water, but that's not the most important thing today. Vandu and the captain are now sailing in dangerous waters. Here, sandbanks are an invisible trap.
Mai na mai mokonzi na ngai, mai na mai. Ok, taka mwanzete, ndeko na ngazo tanzete poto yeba profondeur ya mai o esawa, peut-être toko tuta zelo moya to telema ezate. Mi balé na moko. Ah déjà 0,90. Benda ye déjà, benda ye ya. Benda ye nyoso mokonzi na ngai.
Tetonga to kanga malazela o nesco babeni arrière pour tous les kango. Domo tozo masima. Faible sonaja yikuna yango sco babeni arrière. Zo na sco mai.
Tanjete.
Na makongo. Na wasisa te. Na sepeli bakas pour mai sepeli. Lazima na sepeli pour.
But the sailor celebrated a little too soon. The river's current gets stronger, and the old motor can't fight against the strength of the water. A 100-meter raft can't be steered like a boat. The captain finds himself stuck against an island.
Dérouté parce que charge tozanango na courando moye tozonga vraiment na nzela ya maso eza te yango wana mai puissance ya mai ekitisi biso ti na ile.
Maintenant on va aller là-bas pour aller tirer les radeaux qu'ils tournent. On est coincé.
Donc là on se décroche là.
On sort là pour aller tirer là-bas.
Donc c'est un gros problème là.
Oui, c'est un gros problème, mais simple comme on est déjà habitué de ça.
The maneuver is still extremely tricky, especially when it comes to the safety of the passengers.
Il y a toujours des risques, il peut déchirer tout. Avec les forces de courant, ça peut les déchirer tout.
The helm must be used carefully and power expertly measured. The raft comes away from the bank, and there's even a nice surprise.
Il y a des poissons qui commencent à sauter. Oui, sous les radeaux. Il saute sur les radeaux. Gratuit, il vient lui-même. Il vient lui-même. C'est comme un cadeau.
The huge vessel sets off towards the capital, Kinshasa, again. The miracle fish has his own private cabin. He'll be enjoyed later on. During their 30-day journey, the sailors and passengers don't have to go far for provisions. Every day, people from the villages alongside the river come to sell them all sorts of food. Without these riverside grocers, Gloria wouldn't be able to give her granddaughter anything to eat. They also sell knickknacks, coal for cooking, and sometimes quite frightening animals.
J'ai peur de ça. Il n'est pas quelqu'un de confiance. On ne peut pas mettre ça sur le radeau.
And while everyone's having a laugh, they fail to notice the catastrophe that awaits them. Several sandbanks are looming on the horizon. Vandu and the captain are going to have to zigzag round these unavoidable traps.
Soka ebungi wane komi kokata mbongo uko longola bato ya musala. On a échoué. Là-bas c'est 1,10 m. De l'autre côté c'est 1,40 m. Couper les poussières pour faire tomber les radeaux. Alors peut-être il y a les profondeurs, on peut passer par là-bas.
But if they fail, it'll be a real nightmare.
S'il n'y a pas moyen de tourner radeau, ça va nous imposer de faire répartir radeau à 4 parties. Et après, comment ça ressemble ça? Ça va nous donner même 3 jours.
It's no good. The raft isn't budging. Vandu gets into the water.
Ils sont en train de vérifier si ce gris, mais ils sont foncés avec les sables, mais ce vide n'est pas foncé avec les sables. Notre équipe qui nous empêche ici.
Some of the passengers cheer on the crew. Their singing seems to have reinvigorated the men. After a 5-hour battle, the raft is finally freed.
C'est bon, on a sorti ici le sable. C'est chaud là. C'est chaud là. C'est notre travail. On est toujours super.
Non, je ne suis pas encore soulagé. Pour que je sois soulagé, il faut qu'on sorte à principal.
To get back on track, the men test the depth of the river constantly. After a few more anxious hours, Vandu and the captain are once again back on the right route. Despite the time they've lost, they're hoping to arrive at the outskirts of Kinshasa tomorrow. But nature still has a few surprises left for them. On the road, Bajo's journey has become a slog. He promised his customers that he'd knock out 100 kilometers in a day, but that's not really what's happened. Jean, the eldest passenger, is completely exhausted.
Deuxième jour de voyage, on a passé la nuit dans un village qu'on appelle Guillade, toujours avec de mauvaises conditions.
They've practically not slept overnight. Jean has a bad feeling that the journey has only just begun.
Ça peut nous faire même une semaine. Nous payons 25 000 francs. De chez nous là-bas jusqu'à Kimpese. Nous trouvons ça toujours cher, vu les conditions de vie.
15 euros, which is a fortune for these travelers. The average Congolese salary amounts to 38 euros per month. And to make matters worse, the slightest obstacle means they have to walk. This part of the road is going to make them sweat.
tokangami na potopoto libulu tokoki komata su te bazotimola na Congo komisa tomata azopepa mai batia mabele kokauka mpona leka facile mpona sikoyo ndeni soki na kebo epante kozala makasi donc kame se riska ekwe.
The assistants have been working for 2 days with no respite. Without them, Bajo wouldn't have even traveled 2 kilometers. Their work is intense, but no one complains. They're just happy to have a job.
Non, je n'ai pas encore fatigué. Nous sommes des combattants quand même. Ça fait 1000 francs congolais pendant les voyages. Il n'y a pas de travail dans notre pays.
A thankless job, but not one where you can give up. Sometimes the assistants and passengers find there's an advantage to going this slow.
C'est pour le voyage. Je l'ai lavé pour chaleur. Chaleur. Il fallait laver pendant la temps. On est en train de boire l'eau avec de mauvaises conditions, voir maintenant l'eau que nous buvons. Vraiment, c'est très maigre et tout ça. Rempli de microbes aussi.
But germs or not, they don't really have a choice. Their journey is far from over. They still have 70 kilometers to travel and many obstacles to overcome. Kinshasa is just a few kilometers away, but the weather isn't going to make it easy for them. The last few hours of sailing are going to be very difficult for Vandu and the captain.
Brouillard makasi, il faut vraiment nazala éveiller vraiment pour sauver la gargaison.
Despite this final calamity, they're nearly there. So Jean-Paul, the dry fish merchant, is still smiling.
on est au bout, mais voyez la pluie qui a dit non, je ne vous laisse pas comme ça. C'est une odyssée. On le fait puisqu'on n'a pas assez de moyens. Et si on avait le moyen, on ne pouvait pas prendre de tels risques pour voyager dans de telles conditions. Vraiment, c'est un voyage pénible.
Luckily, the wind is nowhere near as bad as the day before. As a sunny spell breaks out, the capital can finally be seen. Vandu is relieved that the journey is ending after almost 1 month.
Climesa fraîche. C'est une victoire contre la nature. Ce n'est pas seulement pour que les bateaux ou les marchandises arrivent, mais nos vies aussi. Vous voyez, nos vies aussi, c'est très important. Je suis vraiment aimé de quitter Kisangani à la province orientale, 1734 km naviguer sur de l'eau, ce n'est pas facile. Et ça et sauf, et vraiment, je remercie beaucoup les bons dieux parce qu'il nous a protégés. Moi, avec mes chefs, tous là, vraiment, nous sommes très contents d'avoir arrivé.
And he's not the only one. Gloria, the grandmother, traveling with her granddaughter, is going to be able to sell her cassava flour and pay off her debts. She and all the small traders hope that they haven't made this perilous journey for nothing.
Maintenant, il faut vendre pour avoir de l'argent. Nous avons la joie, vraiment. Maintenant, nous espérons l'argent par après.
As for the sailors, they'll spend another 3 days dismantling the 22 logs. For the travelers on the truck, however, their nightmare is far from over. In 2 days, Bajo has traveled only 70 kilometers. He'll spend another 48 hours getting through the last 30 kilometers. As for the passengers, they'll all tell you their feet hurt. Like Jean.
Sur les 100 km de route, tu en fais combien en marchant?
Oh, presque 90 km. Ça se va la vie.
The Congolese people are resilient, finding work, getting something to eat, and even traveling from one place to another. Everything requires an excessive amount of energy. Their lives are a battle equal only to their courage.